I was just going to follow on this, and I think there's a very central role around the purpose and the training and development of leaders in the organisations. We've spoken about this where, unfortunately, people tend to get promoted because they were good at the last role, not because they were leaders. And I think there has to be a fundamental shift in thinking that leadership and management, and the two sides of the same coin, is a role in itself, and an important role, particularly in a society where we are getting more connected and teams are going to be more fluid. So people are coming in. So how do you engage those individuals and get them working with one purpose? Well, that strikes really as a leader inside of that. But they need to understand, and organisations need to give them the space to add that value inside of those roles. If you look at the military, whether it's both sides of whether it's the United States or the British military, they will invest a huge amount of training in the training and development of their leaders before they even let loose on their troops. In the first instance, young officers, they'll spend anywhere between a year to 2 years or even 4 years in terms of the US Army before they are let loose in their first leadership roles. And there's continuous leadership development throughout their careers in terms of that, because they know that the nature and the reinforcement of those skills needs development over time. And I think some respects that's where the digital economy is going to start forcing us down a route of the importance of recognise the leader. It brings us back to analytics, because often it's proven, if you're standing in front of a CEO and say, I want to invest a few £100,000 in a leadership course or send people away, the first question with the CFO sat on the side of them is going to be, right, well, what's my return on that? Now, up until now, that's been tremendously difficult outside of some limited knowledge around some surveys, and some work that absolutely proves that point. But that has become general knowledge, and it's in that context. So if you've got something that's giving you analytics, well, over this division here, we know they're good leaders, that we've got feedback inside of that, and they're outperforming this division over here. So you can start to make some, I'm giving it a very simplistic look at it at this stage, but you can make some deductions about employee engagement and how those leaders are going to affect it.
Okay, so let me push back on that. I've got something on employee voice versus employee noise, and I'll come on to that in a second. Let's just, because we're on leadership now, let's follow this through. I'd be very interested. You used the military analogy, and if you look at corporate life historically, the org chart and so on, it has followed along military lines, but the contemporary companies seem to be moving away from that. My question is this, not that we should ignore the investment made in leadership. I completely agree with that, and one can see the rationale behind it. But are you talking about a world in which, our children join an organisation, the profiling, the digital profiling, the data on them shows that one of them is actually perfectly suited to leadership? Do they have to wait for a given prescribed set of time and things, or can they assume leadership immediately? What's your view on that?
If I can answer the question, I'll just come back to a little about understanding how the military work.
Yeah.
First of all, certainly in peacetime, it can look like and appear a very hierarchical organisation. In military operations, that is not the way that the military operate. They fit teams to task. So one day you can be part of this, and the next day you can be part of another team. And they have to blend people very, very quickly in combat environments and operational environments to tasks. So you might have some big guns, infantry, tanks and engineers, and the next day you might be some guns and infantry, and that's it. The leaders then have to blend those very, very, very quickly, and people are very used to operating in a very, very fluid environment. So there's a bit of dichotomy for the military in terms of how they operate. Operations, it's very, very fluid, and it probably has some relationship to the digital economy. If you look at the modern battlefield and the way that you use digital communications now, there's a lot of similarities. It's actually allowed them to do more with less. I think, could we just come back to your second question?
New incumbents, yeah.
New incumbents. I think what we know and understand about leadership, and there are absolute volumes and tomes written about this and various theories. My personal view is that a lot of people have latent leadership ability. It can be developed. That you can pick leadership out at an early age, and some organisations do that very, very successfully. Others come back to this thing about it's all about experience, all about knowledge. Yes, there is a quote in there, and it does add value into that leadership mixture. So I think it's unfortunately a much more complex question, but I think it comes back to people in HR departments being able to set it in context for their organisations and what's needed. And again, it comes back to this powerful analytics piece around about, right, what is going to work here, and can we identify those characteristics? I think probably more qualified than me to speak on that piece, but it's...
I think leadership is being redefined. And on the one hand, there's tens of thousands of books on what leadership is, and there's trends and there's fads. But the fact of the matter is that leaders emerge from all sorts of places and in all sorts of contexts. And the question is, what is the purpose of a leader? So, for example, if we simply look at analytics based on how people have interacted in an organization, whether that's through understanding their phone calls and their emails, not content, but the nature of the connections there, or indeed participation in a social platform, we can recognize that very often the people who are truly influencing, the people who really have the voice of their colleagues or who are representing ideas that their colleagues value, which we'll often see, for example, in employee jams, where we use social networks to gather insight from an organization. Very often the influence is not with the leaders that technically have the title leader. So, in your organization, and increasingly, for example, in wirocracies, the idea is to actually let those in the moment of importance have the influence that needs to be had to motivate a workforce to an end, rather than necessarily handing a title around. I think the other point is that leadership is context specific. So, one of the common questions is, how early can we tell if someone has potential? Well, the person that it would take to lead a bank might be quite different from the person it would take to lead a tech company or indeed a retailer. Very different environments. So whilst there are some innate things that we can look for which suggest people are more likely to succeed, and that'll be their sense of resilience and emotional control. That might be their intellectual capacity to deal with diversity. It's also going to have a lot to do with their motivation to succeed in a leadership role. And not everybody sees that as their aspiration. So we've got to consider how we keep people motivated in times when that is inspiring or motivating for them. Do we reward that and recognize that? But also at times perhaps in their lives where they want to take a back seat and perhaps not be leading but still be contributing. Do we allow for that to give people a sense of diversity and of experience? A final point, which is that increasingly organizations are recognizing the need to have as much recognition and respect for those who have not pursued people leadership roles but thought and excellence and technical leadership as a priority, because organizations are dependent on them too. So in engineering, for example, or in IT, and in a lot of places, even with chefs, you don't need to be able to lead people in a kitchen to be able to come up with the most innovative recipe that will really bring people to a restaurant. And it's about getting the people respect without them having to have that title as the ultimate hierarchical claim within the organization. And I think these are the things that we're getting much more recognition of, which is changing the way organizations structure themselves, or indeed organically will force organizations to change the way they structure themselves.